Hello and welcome to the Tetration video series. My name is Rob, I'm here with Tim, and in this section we're going to talk to application workspaces. Now Tim, in subsequent modules we've spoken through some of the building blocks with Tetration and how we create an inventory and we build some structure around that with things like scopes. And in this module we're actually going to step into how we start to build policy, or what is the place in Tetration that we actually define policy, model the policy, analyze it, and ultimately enforce that policy. So given the key building blocks of Tetration and the real anchor points for policy being the scopes, what we're going to look at is policy that's applied across different scopes in the hierarchy. And perhaps before we get into that and dig into further detail with the workspaces themselves, let's just take a look at the scope tree we've got for our sort of example environment here, and what makes sense in terms of placement of policies and how we might build that up.
Okay. So this reflects the scope tree that we've created for our demo environment. You can see that we've cut a little bit off the top of the tree just to keep it simple. And we're starting here from the cloud layer. So this is basically where our workloads have been selected based on the attributes that they have, which includes being part of our application workloads. So we've split down to applications and services within inside the cloud. And then under applications, we've got one application, or I should say one group of applications called banking, and a sub-application called core. And then under that, we have the lifecycle of prod. So obviously in a larger real production scope tree, we would have a lot more different leaf nodes of this tree. We would have dev, testing underneath core. We would have multiple applications under banking, and clearly we'd have more than just the banking application, but we've tried to keep it nice and simple.
Yeah, so we've got a focal point just on this particular application and really looking at policies that are discovered and built around that application, but also the other key components and maybe other layers in which we can actually apply policy that apply there. So in other modules we've spoken to the policy lifecycle and also how we actually do policy discovery. If we've got an application, and let's just say there's 50 workloads that make up this core banking production application, what's the right place that we actually want to perform the application level discovery for that?
So for the application level discovery of policies that specifically relate to that application, and in particular that production version of the application, the place that we want to create the workspace, associate the policies with, and ultimately run ADM is via this prod part of the scope tree. Okay, so right here. Right
down at the leaf of the tree, right? Because that's ultimately the derivation of that application instance, the different components that make up the application, and again, the scope being the holding group for those 50 workloads, and we're still going to then do a further breakdown in terms of the actual tiers of that application or the subcomponents that make it up.
Exactly, but it makes sense to keep those policies as close as possible to that scope and relating to that application only.
Yep.
But that can't be the only policies, right, for a data center. And that's why we might want to associate some policies elsewhere. And I see that on the screen here we do have some more policies. So
exactly, yeah. So let's maybe switch back to the screen here, because you can actually see that we do have a number of workspaces, and here we're dealing with the part of the user interface that's termed applications. Now the application page is where we find the list of overall workspaces, and then we can dig into each and every one of those and actually build them out, analyze them, etc. For creating a workspace, it's simple as clicking on the tab here to open up a new one. And one of the key components of that workspace, and we'll explore this in a bit further detail, is which scope it is associated to.
Okay.
So we've got the ability to create a workspace that's just targeted at that leaf scope, just that core banking app. But we do have the ability to apply policy at other points in the scope tree. So the interesting part of that is this is where we can start to have application-specific policies, and then maybe have other points of policy introduction that might cover other business requirements. Maybe a set of policies that applies to all banking applications. So maybe there's some regulatory requirements perhaps that applies, that we just want to make sure that are adhered to by every application, even if it's a separate application teams that might be responsible for their specific components. We might always want to have some overriding policy in there.
So you're saying I keep the application-specific policies with the application scope.
Yep.
But if I need to create more generic policies, those that might apply to multiple applications or even across the entire data center,
yep,
I create a workspace that is associated with a scope that's higher in the scope tree.
Exactly. And the benefit of that is you don't have to then replicate those same policies in each and every application space. It's defined once at the higher level, and then it flows through to the underlying applications.
Oh, okay. So you're talking about policies that I might have repeated over and over, like
yep,
accessing DNS servers or accessing Active Directory.
Yep.
Those kind of policies I don't have to repeat on an application-by-application basis if I do this?
That's exactly right, Tim. And if you look at the layers that we've got, again, coming back to the tree there, we've got the app, this set of, let's say in this case, the banking applications. Then you go even higher. You might want to have some global policies like we have here that just are adhered to for everybody. And these would be really where you'd have those common services or the things that we just want to set once and have all applications adhere to.
Okay.
The other aspect of this, as we've discussed previously, is also that each layer in the tree also has a different set of role-based access control. So you could have different owners for different sets of policy, and obviously there's a prioritization of those policies to make sure that those rules get adhered to.
Okay, so I could give the application owner for the core banking application access to this workspace,
yep,
but I might be able to restrict what they can do in the global policies. I don't want them messing around with those.
Exactly, yeah. So we want to have that higher level control of those that apply to all.
Okay.
Okay. So maybe let's dig into an actual workspace itself.
Let's go for it.
So let's start with the core banking app, because that's where we've got our workloads that are running, and this is where we actually have the ability to lay out the policy, or to actually go through the discovery of the policy that makes up this application.
Okay.
Now, the interesting thing about here is that that policy is already existing in this case, right? So
yes,
subsequent modules will actually run through the discovery of the policy and how we actually reach this. But for the purposes of walking through the workspace and understanding the components, we're starting with one that already exists.
Yep. Because there's things I'm interested to learn about. There's a lot here for me to initially take stock of, so
yep,
I'm looking forward to you walking through what each one of these different pieces mean.
Okay, excellent, excellent. So maybe we'll start with a more graphical overview of what this application actually looks like. That is a way just to, I guess, give the high-level visualization that's really understandable for each of the parties that's taking a look and trying to understand what is this policy, how is it made up, how does it work.
Okay, so if I'm the application owner, and I don't really know a huge amount about networking, ports, protocols, IPs, but I still want to get a quick visualization. This is where I'm going to go to.
Yeah, so the app view allows us to really just get a simplified model, right?
Okay.
So we have the other components, and we'll step into those next in terms of how the different building blocks that actually make this up. But the point here is that we actually have a way to very simply see how we've got different groups that are actually communicating together that make up this application. We've got the lines or the arrows that connect them together. They're the services or the policies that actually make up the overall policy itself. And then we've got a different set of ways that we can explore this. And there's a lot of, the workspace effectively provides you the tool set to be able to step through that from the very first build out or the analysis of the application all the way through to that enforcement and the alerting configuration beyond that.
Okay, so it's a very powerful toolbox, lots of things that I can play with. Explain me a little bit more about what this line is showing them between the two here.
So what we're essentially doing, and the sort of step one in the discovery of the policy, is to actually create the groups. Now, making up this application, we've got 10 workloads. So for this particular workplace, 10 workloads have been analysed to create the subgroups We call those clusters, and we'll step into this tab in a moment to see what clusters we've actually got defined. These groups here are effectively the clusters or potentially other scopes, if they're external dependencies, that are making up the application.
Okay, so this is my banking application talking to an external dependency key value store.
Yep. And you can actually see, if you click on any of the objects in here, you get the breakdown on the right-hand side here. So it'll tell you what that is. It's a filter. It's got a specific query against a scope. So in this case, it is an external dependency based in the services, so the shared services space for us.
Okay.
Yep.
And so each one of these groups, I see this one only has one workload. For example, is the banking web, what happens if I have multiple web servers underneath that? Does it represent that?
It does. So in fact, when we do the analysis, we're looking at how we actually can match workload behaviors together to actually create a group. Because in a lot of cases, whether it's the infrastructure owners, even the application owners, don't necessarily have that 100% clear view of these 10 workloads, the 50 workloads, exactly what functions they provide, the actual role or the tier within the application.
Okay.
In a lot of cases, that's something that's best discovered.
Yeah, sounds about normal, right?
Yeah. And it also can be the case that there is an expectation, or there is a belief that we know how this particular tier of the application is made up.
Okay.
And when you actually run the discovery, you find that may or may not be 100% accurate, right? So we're looking at really validating that information and being able to then have a confirmed group that we can then base the application on.
Okay, so I can see that there's a group here, banking web, and the more I click into it, the more I can see information about the workloads that are there.
Exactly. So in the banking web component, we've actually got the 3 workloads. And we can see the individual workloads that have been picked up here as part of that policy. And this is something, in our case, again, we've discovered through the ADM process.
Okay, so this little circle on the screen, as you can see there, that's highlighted by banking web.
Yep.
That's not necessarily just one workload. That's actually one or more workloads. It's an entire tier of the application.
Exactly.
Okay.
The point here is that we want to, wherever possible, be working to groups of workloads that have a common set of characteristics, common set of communication behaviors, a common set of processes that are underlying those, and we do the analysis to make sure that we group them effectively.
So that grouping has been performed by titration for me automatically based on the behavior.
That is correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's something that we'll break down further in the ADM, or application dependency mapping component.
Sounds good.
All right. So that basically is just a quick way to just get that visual understanding of our application. Now let's just dig a little deeper into some of the other parts of the user interface and the key elements of the workspace.
No, I do like this visual understanding here, and I can definitely see that I could share this with the application developer and help communicate or bridge our two worlds together about what I'm seeing on the network and what I'm going to enforce in policy and what they are seeing from the application side.
That's right, and I think it gives you a quick way to understand the actual dependencies with a very direct view of what is actually happening in that environment, right?
Nice.
So we keep the noise level low. We want to be able to talk to the application owners about the specific components that they understand in terms that they can understand, and really do that validation of what exists there. So we've talked about the groups, and we've, in the course of the video series, we've talked about scopes, we've talked about filters, and the other one is clusters.
Okay.
So a cluster is another way that we can actually group workloads within a workspace.
So it's a subgrouping inside the existing workspace, inside the scope.
Yeah, and this allows us to really do that, let's say, high-level grouping to create the scope. And that, in this case, that's 10 workloads. It could be 50, it could be 100. And it allows us to then do perform that next level subgrouping of that through analysis. Now, certainly in some cases, that may be already very well known. That can be, you can either manually or directly create this, perhaps through the through an automated action when instantiating an application.
Okay.
And again, the environments that we're dealing with vary from the this fairly static world, or the existing applications that have been running for quite some time, versus maybe new container applications, which in those cases we handle in different ways because they're very different in their nature.
Okay, but what you're saying is even if you throw the kitchen sink at titration, it's going to have the right tools to work out exactly what clusters are there and part of that application.
Exactly, because that's really the hard problem to deal with is, okay, I know I've got 50 workloads that are making up this application. What are they doing? I don't know, because when you're talking micro-segmentation, you need to have that much more granular or detailed policy that's enforced to the workload.
Okay.
Yeah, so we want to be able to, do grouping, and the cluster is that element that titration will create. It will discover when it's actually performing the ADM for you. So the groups on the screen here, you can see of the 10 workloads that we've analysed, we've actually discovered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 subgroups, and we call those clusters.
Okay. So typically you're saying clusters are going to be auto-generated versus the scopes and the filters that you might create yourself as the user.
That's right.
Okay.
Yep. So just in the same way as we saw earlier, we can break down each one of these to understand what workloads were discovered, what's part of that, and we can also see the query, or titration can suggest queries to you for dynamic ways to actually match those workloads.
So I can see the query there is based on a tag being the tier.
Exactly.
Versus the IP address.
Yeah, so it could well be at first pass, maybe it's just these 3 IP addresses. But that doesn't necessarily lead to a dynamic outcome. It's a more static mapping, and we want the way to be able to build each of the groups in titration in a way that allows change. We want to perhaps be able to scale out this application tier by adding new machines. The best way to do that is not by having to go back and adjust the policy by adding more IP addresses into the group, but to be able to tag it or annotate it to be able to match to some other attribute that is dynamically going to populate this group when that action occurs.
So that fits in with some of the other modules that we've looked at, like the orchestrators, where we've been able to connect to systems like vCenter or Kubernetes that can provide us these tags, which the cluster is now using those tags to define the policy.
Exactly. And so when titration performs the discovery, it will actually look at all of the information that it has, everything from host names to operating systems to the tags and the things it brings in through the orchestrators to identify if I've discovered there's 3 machines that are performing a particular function, what attributes are common across those so that it can then create the query for you or suggest the query that you can then say, yeah, that's the appropriate one for me. Okay, so we've got a number of clusters in this particular application. You can see that they're all dynamic, which means they're based on a particular query that's associated with it, like we just saw. And the other thing is there's an approval. Now, the approval is really a key element here because it allows, when you're having the review and discussion around these groupings, a way to validate those and say, if we've actually performed the discovery and we've defined a query against it, we want to effectively approve that and lock it in so we're not it doesn't change over time.
Okay, so that's literally the thumbs up there, and that's where you as the end user, whether you are a part of the security team or if you're the application developer or a combination of the both, you've walked through that cluster and you've looked at the results. You said, I like the query, I like the workloads of the group together, let's lock that in and continue to use that.
Yes, absolutely. And you'll see this similar approval component in different elements as we go through here, because once you have actually, as you go through this process, you want to be able to lock in the things that are the known good, the things that you want to retain and not have them change over time.
Okay, so when I do that, I'm feeding that information actually back into titration, and it won't override that or change that. It's actually going to update the machine
It's
learning.
effectively saying a human has gone in and approved this particular function, whether it's a grouping or a policy entry, whatever it might be.
So one day the machines might take over, but at least for now I can have some control.
That's right, and we'll take it while it's there. So that's the groups, the clusters, and we saw those in the visual analysis. Now, in that diagram, we also saw the arrows that connected the different groups together.
Okay.
Now, what they are is the policies. Now, for each application, and again, where we've run the dependency mapping, Tetration provides the groups and the policies that connect those together. And you'll see that in this particular view here. Now, the policies can be viewed in different ways. Again, whether you prefer just a table type view or a graphical view to be able to really dig deeper and understand, right? So one of the key attributes to this, or sort of certainly something to note, is the actions. So let's just take a look at maybe one of these rules. The top rule here says we are going to allow the consumer, the banking app, to talk to a provider called message queue.
Okay, and you mentioned consumer and provider. Quickly, tell me a little bit more about consumer and provider, because I've heard that term before. I've also heard client server. Is it the same kind of thing?
It's same kind of thing. It's really based on promise theory. There's I guess, a more academic background to how these terms came about, but it is basically a promise that a service is going to be provided. In this case, a TCP port is available to be consumed by this this object.
Okay, so it's a directional policy.
It is absolutely directional, and it does not, in that nature, allow for the reverse to take place. In terms of, particularly when we're talking about directional protocols, that we want to make sure only happen in that direction.
Okay, so we can consider each one of these lines as a stateful policy in that way.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. Excellent. So, consumer is able to consume a service from the provider, and in this case, it's a TCP service. Now, what we can see here are a set of allow rules where each one of these rules has one or more services available. And you can see that over on the right-hand side here. And there's a catch-all of deny. So what does that tell us about this policy, Tim?
So I'm going to imagine that means there's a deny any at the bottom of this policy, and anything that doesn't match one of these specific allows is going to be denied by the catch-all. Is that right?
Correct. And what this is effectively making up is a whitelist policy.
Okay.
So there's different policy options that we have here, and what we're trying to do is to be able to discover or to define the explicit set of services that are required to actually run this application. The point here is that we want to have a very secure outcome in terms of the policy that we're going to enforce, and we need to make sure that in doing so, we're not going to disrupt or break the application in doing that.
Okay, so let's say I'm just dipping my toes into the water, and I'm not quite fully ready to go to a whitelist. Can I change that catch-all to another statement, maybe permit any?
Yes, you can. It's a binary choice. It's permit or it's deny.
Okay.
And again, this is something that we will explore more deeply in subsequent modules in terms of both policy lifecycle, but also ways to enforce this policy and the options you have to do it in let's say, a staged approach, particularly based on the risk, etc., applied to the application. But that is an option. You can, as a starting point, to flip that deny to allow, and that will allow you to actually still enforce a policy, but not enforce the catch-all of deny, which means if there was something that was missing here, it wouldn't actually impact the application.
Okay. So I can either have it in a whitelist mode or a blacklist mode, or potentially even greylist if I want to.
That is correct, yeah. So, and that's something that we'll explore as we look at some of the other workspaces as well, where we might want to actually deploy some specific deny rules to stop specific providers and consumers from talking to each other. That's where we might use that.
Okay.
So you end up combining allows and denies, using that across the hierarchy with a prioritization to give you an overall outcome.
Okay.
Yep. But within the application, really this is the goal that we're shooting for. Micro-segmentation with a whitelist approach that we've actually stepped through the discovery and the validation and the analysis of that to reach a point that we are very confident and comfortable with this whitelist so that we can enforce it.
Okay. And to be completely clear, this whitelist, the set of policies that you have your mouse hovered over, you didn't write those in yourself?
No, so these were discovered by Tetration, and in fact, as we step down onto the right-hand side here again to see a little bit further detail, you can actually see that Tetration has discovered it and has provided a confidence rating for us. So the confidence rating is based on the actual flows, the underlying flows that were seen during the period of the analysis. And one of the next things we'll step into from here is how we can start to understand why were these flows even generated, right? So there's other elements in the user interface that give us just that next level of why is this here? Let's justify it. Let's look at the conversations, the flows that made that up.
So if I'm doing the first visual analysis of this policy, I can look at that if I'm scratching my head, and it's going to help me understand a bit more information about why Tetration created that policy.
Yeah, because in most cases, there will certainly be things that are expected. In a lot of cases, there are services, there are policy entries, maybe that are unexpected. And there's always the question of, why is that? Should it be there? Let's try and work it out. So that allows us to really dig deeper and get the answer. Now, just as we sort of saw with the clusters as well, we've got the ability, if we determine that this is good and this is an approved policy entry, we've got the ability to click the approval button and give that the thumbs up, which then says we've, even as we progress further, this is going to be permitted and it'll stay in the policy. Okay. Because I mean, a big part of this is about really a life cycle and making sure that over time the policy will continue to stay alive and match the nature of the application as it changes.
So if I approve it, it's going to stay there and it will always be there.
Yep.
If I don't approve it, it's going to do what?
Well, but if the actual communication continues to be active, and let's just say some months down the track you did another ADM to do some additional discovery, if that had gone quiet, it would maybe was just a seasonal, like a end of month thing or a quarterly thing that we actually didn't see in the new analysis period, then it has the potential to actually drop from the policy, because we would rediscover it and say, well, it's no longer there. So this allows us to retain that and keep it in the policy as we move forward.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yep. So let's just kind of step through a couple of these other components here I think that were critical. So we talked to this policy view, the discovered policy, the application policy. Now, in Tetration terms, that's what we call a default policy. Okay, and we've also touched on the catch-all, which is ultimately anything that doesn't match the policy that's described here will ultimately be denied. Okay. And again, that can be changed depending on the circumstances of what you're trying to achieve. The other component there is the absolute policy. Now, if default policy is the discovered policy, Tim, that we've sort of brought in through application dependency mapping as an example, what do you think the absolute policy might be?
It sounds like it's a little bit more strict. Maybe it might be something that humans are enforcing, making sure that it absolutely happens, maybe? Yeah,
that's totally right. The point here is that we actually have an ordered policy. There is suggested policy, which is really the default policy, and then there's the ability to have a set of overrides. And that's basically where we say, look, regardless of what actually happens or what's discovered, we just always want to make sure that this takes place. And so there is an ordering of the policy, which is also, we will cover in more detail in subsequent sessions. That also applies across the hierarchy as well. So absolute policies will always be, I guess, matched to before the default policies, and then ultimately the catch-alls come at the bottom.
Okay, so you're saying if I put a policy in absolute, it is going to override what I see in the default policies, if there is a clash?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay.
So We've talked about clusters and policies. The policies themselves are actually based on conversations. And now there's different ways that you can sort of get through or sort of analyse the conversations. The conversations is a roll-up of all of the flows that have taken place there. So instead of there being 100,000 flows between this consumer and provider or these IPs with a given service, we roll that up into a conversation.
So we could be communicating for a very long period of time if we're two services talking to each other.
Yep.
We could have hundreds of thousands of individual flows on the wire over that time. But in essence, we still just maintained one high-level conversation.
That's right. And that is what has made up the actual policy. And you can actually, so whilst the conversation tabs will give us the full list of conversations and the full breakdown, we can also get there by, again, let's say we're just trying to get to the bottom of this particular service and say, well, what were the conversations that made this up? Yep. Why did it exist? We can simply say, for this service entry, show me the conversations that were there. And here we'll actually see the consumers and providers in terms of the groups. We'll see the consumer and provider addresses within those groups that actually communicated in those.
Okay, so I can see that there is the banking app consumer on the left-hand side.
Yep.
And then the consumer address, we have two separate entities talking to that provider.
Correct, yep. So just because we have a group, and the group consists of multiple IPs, we're now sort of getting that next level of detail. Which IPs in the group were actually communicating? Who was having the conversations?
Okay.
So it gives us that greater level of detail.
And this could be useful if I have a group or a scope that's communicating to something that has lots of endpoints in it, and I want to see exactly which endpoints inside that scope were communicating.
Exactly, and that could be a way to start to refine the policy more. Like sometimes there will be a larger scope, and maybe there's only a small number of IPs that you're communicating to. Rather than have the policy entry to the large scope, we create a smaller group, a filter that's going to then give us a more refined policy output.
Okay, so this actually really helps in the life cycle of refining policy.
That's right, yep. Now, we won't go sort of into it right now, but the next level beyond this is, okay, we see the IPs and they're talking to each other. Let's see that in more detail. Was it just a spike that occurs every 2 a.m. on a Thursday morning? Or is it long, sustained flows over a period of time? And the titration gives you the full flow detail that underpins every one of these conversations. And the point of sort of following this path is you can very quickly get to the point where you have filtered views that just take you to exactly what you're after. So by me clicking on that previous tab, it took me to something that was already filtered, already had the entries because I told it what I wanted to see.
Okay.
Yeah, so a very quick way to
so I can go
really get to something very specific.
That high-level view right down to that very, very detailed, even a per-flow basis if I want to.
That's correct. And all of these, yes, you can enter your own search criteria. In a lot of cases, it's the one thing that you're just investigating and you can get there very quickly and easily. So we now have a couple of other really components to talk to. There's other things that probably stand out here in terms of what else the workspace is offering to us. One of the things that I'll just note up the top here is primary and secondary. So every workspace, when it's created, it can actually be a primary or a secondary, whereas secondary is more of an experiment. It's a place that we can analyse, we can check behaviours, and that is a policy. It's actually something that, as a secondary, we can't actually enforce. It's not enforceable because it's an experiment.
Oh, so it's like a sandbox. Or
yeah.
If I want to give an intern access to the system to start playing with some policy, I can give them a secondary workspace and they won't damage anything.
That's right. Whereas a primary is really you labelling it as the source of truth for policy.
Okay.
Now, by making a policy primary, it also opens up new capabilities for you as well.
Okay.
So these tabs over on the right-hand side here, policy analysis enforcement, they only appear once we actually mark a policy as primary, and then that really it gives us, again, a new set of tools that we want to use to take the policy beyond the initial discovery into the actual point that we want to be able to truly analyse this, enable active analysis for the policy, and then ultimately to enforce it.
Okay. So if I want to get the policy analysis tab and the enforcement tab to show up,
Yep.
I have to have the workspace in primary.
That's right, yep.
And I guess primary sounds like there's only one primary workspace.
That is right, there can only be one primary. One primary for each workspace, and that's and with each workspace tied to a scope, ultimately each scope can only have one primary workspace.
Okay,
Yep.
so there's one set of primary policies or one primary workspace for that scope, but I could have multiple secondaries.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
And we can flip back to the overview tab, which we'll do in a moment, where we'll actually see different policy types there as well, and different ways that you can view, like just the ones of interest. Like just show me the analysed policies, just show me the enforced policies.
Oh, okay.
So you can get a very refined view across what's potentially a large environment.
Okay, I can see how that would be useful if I'm dealing with a very large-scale environment.
Yes. So let's step into the policy analysis page. Again, this will be the subject of another module in the series, so we won't go into too much detail here. But as a primary policy, this is, again, part of the life cycle of the policy. We want to discover it, then we want to analyse it, we want to test it, make sure that it's accurate, capture any out of policy flows so that we can work out what to do with those. Do we want to, is it something to remediate? Is it some malicious behaviour? We want to make sure that the policy is behaving correctly.
Okay, so I want to, in a sense, take the haystack away and go right down to the needle of the policies that I should be tweaking or the flows that I need to care about when I'm doing policy analysis.
That's right. And this view really gives you that view. And the other thing that's really key to this is it's also time-based. You can choose a specific point in time. You can take the current policy, you can activate that, which kicks it off at a point in time, and then it'll highlight all of the flows that are within the policy, i.e. the permitted flows, but also the non-compliant flows. Okay.
So I can go right to the ones I need to take a look at first.
Exactly. You're not lost in a whole mess of packet captures and stuff to try and find the things that should or shouldn't be there. You can see what occurred, when it occurred, and very specific details of those flows that are there. So at any point in time, and obviously there are different ways that this you can view in different ways through different lenses, whether it's IPs, ports, protocols. There's a whole range of things that you can actually sort of focus it on, depending on what you're trying to achieve.
So I can slice and dice the data, even if it's using tags, my custom tags. I can search on those. Yes, yeah,
and that's something that we'll see for pretty much any of the filters. That's probably a good thing to check in Tetration. Anywhere there's one of these question marks, you typically can hover over that and then get a list of everything that we can actually introduce as a way to filter this view. And if we scroll down, we see towards the bottom there, so not only
it's a lot.
the flow-related information, the ports and protocols,
location, process, scope, some details about the performance of the flow.
Yep. But down the bottom here this is where we see all of our tags.
So we can see the tags that we put into the system earlier.
The tags that we put into the system, so show me the flows that were between prod and dev.
Okay.
As an example. Both provider and consumer side filters can be put into place here. And any combination of these things, I won't keep scrolling, it'll keep going, but it's very easy and quick to find the very specific thing that you're after.
Yeah, there's a lot that I can filter on there.
There is, Tim. You could lose yourself.
I could get stuck all day just searching for flows that are interesting.
Well, it's sometimes a trap you've got to avoid, particularly if there is something of interest. There's an immense amount of detail there, and that's actually an important part that we are capturing all traffic, permitted, rejected, as well as sort of other sort of traffic type, again, depending on the phase of your where you are in the policy lifecycle. That gives you a tremendous amount of detail for forensic purposes as well. So if you wanted to see what were those rejected flows last Tuesday morning at 6 a.m. and maybe what were the permitted flows around that as well. We've actually got full resolution of all of those packets. We're not sort of simply focusing on one particular traffic type there.
Okay, and yeah, you said last Tuesday, but I can see here, like, there's multiple months worth of data that you have here.
That's right, yeah. So, I mean, you can establish a very specific time query. You can select a time window in the view here that's going to take you to that very specific point in time. And in a lot of cases, again, it's not always the, just simply rejected flows. It might be other detail that you're looking for, and we capture, we retain, and give you the ability to effectively roll back time to actually see what took place.
Okay. And the flow data that we're seeing here, the data that we're analyzing, it's just specific to this application. I might have billions of flows across my data center, but I'm only seeing a couple of thousand here, right?
Correct, yeah. So we're in the realms of this workspace. And the beauty of that, Tim, is that let's just say something, the application changed. There was some impact to the application, and we wanted to investigate it. We don't need to start with everything and try and work our way down. Was it the banking core prod application that was impacted? Yep. Let's go straight to the source of truth. We know all the flows, we can see exactly what we want. And we're dealing with, or we're taking that down from potentially, 50 billion flow records down to, at this particular point in time where there was some sort of issue, we're dealing with I don't know, let's say 1,000 records that we then will further sort of filter or refine to get to the 3 that were meaningful to us in a very short space of time.
Yeah, I can see that could really reduce the mean time to resolution when we have some issue.
Yes, exactly. So the next step, we've analysed our policy. We're able to, again, see the detail. We're able to analyse those, potentially the rejected flows, and we can sort of tune this to give us the view that we're after. But let's just say that we've refined that policy and we're ready. We know that over the last period of time that we're comfortable with, every flow that has taken place for this application is accounted for. So we've remediated the things that shouldn't be there. We have refined the policy, and we know that if we can enforce this microsegmentation policy or the whitelist policy as defined, we're not going to break this application. It's not going to be impacted. It's only going to start to secure it and each of the workloads with that.
So we'll go into more detail in the other module, but when we're looking at this graph, we're saying when it's saying 100% permitted, that means as long as the traffic stays the same,
yes,
this application is not going to break when I enable segmentation.
Exactly. Yep.
Okay, well, I've been eyeing up that enforcement tab in the top right for a while now, so it must be time to get there.
Let's not hold back. Let's get straight over there. So the enforcement tab is where we see the big green button here. Okay.
I've been waiting to press that one.
Yeah. Now, there is something else that, just before we sort of actually get to that one, just something to mention. So firstly, we see currently enforcement is disabled here. One of the things that often comes up is, well, before I do this, what happens if something happens? The phone rings, and there's a problem to deal with. Well, there's numerous things you can do there, but we actually do record all of the actual policy lifecycle. There's an audit trail that says what's changed, when. We track the versions there's a full version history there. And this little sort of clock button over on the left side here reveals all of the previous versions to us so that we actually can compare versions, and we've got a rollback function.
Okay, so you're saying if I make a mistake, which I would never do, but
Never.
if I did make a mistake, I would have the capability to go back in time.
Well, let's just say Remy made a mistake, and then
it's more
you
likely
got called
that
in to
Remy
fix
would
it,
make
right?
a mistake. Yes.
So that's how we can achieve that. But the big green button here allows us to take the policy that has been defined, that we saw earlier, right? Our whitelist rules with the catch-all associated to that, just scoped to this particular application. I mean, a part of stepping into enforcement is scoping that. By doing it within the workspace, and in this case, we're down at the leaf, so we're at the the actual application itself. The scope of enforcement is just for, in this case, those 10 workloads that make up this application.
Oh, so I'm not switching on policy enforcement data center wide or Tetration cluster wide, it's just for this specific set of endpoints.
That's correct. Now, we'll see in a moment workspaces for other points in the scope tree. As you step up in the hierarchy, you've got the ability to enforce policy at other levels. Now, if you enforce policy there, then it applies within the, I guess, the substructure of that scope. Again, it gives you the policy hierarchy that we're looking for.
Okay. So we have the policy ready to go, and we could enforce the policies.
Yep, that's right. So actually, it's your lab, Tim. I can hit the button if you want.
Yeah.
But, so what that's suggesting to us is which version of policy we want to enforce. We can choose the latest policy, the one that we've adapted, or if there are previous versions, we can choose to enforce a previous edition of the policy as well.
Okay.
For the audit trail purposes, we give some reasons, an explanation for fixing Remy's mistake, and then we can enforce that. And that gives us, again, the ability to see what happened and when, should we wish to change things at rollback.
And so you're saying it's not until this point, when we click accept and enforce, that it would actually go and make any changes to a workload?
That is correct. Now, the dependencies there are, so for us to effectively enforce this policy on a workload, on these 10, we expect, one, that they have the enforcement capability deployed in the agent.
Okay.
So they've got the ability to control the host firewall. And two, there is a configuration, every agent has a configuration associated to it that has enforcement enabled in that policy. So if both of those checks are in play, when this policy is enforced, we're telling it that we're able to now program the policy down. Tetration computes the policy, again, a custom policy for each workload based on the combination of policy or the flattened policy across the hierarchy based on what's been configured there, and it will program that down.
Okay. And I guess we'll look at that in more detail in the enforcement module.
We will indeed look at that in more detail in a subsequent module.
And one other question here. Yep. There's another graph that looks very similar to the graph in the previous screen. Is this one looking at the enforced policies versus the analyzed policies, or why are there two very similar graphs?
So when we actually click the Enforce Policy button here, and it's actually an important task, and clearly we haven't done that at this point, we actually insert a flag into the timeline here. So we can actually see the point in time that the policy was enforced, and yes, it will allow us, this is looking at the enforced policy as it differentiates from the analysed policy, because it's possible they could actually be different versions. So we talked about versioning of the policy, and which means that I may go through this process and I might enforce, let's say, policy version P5. Flag goes in, from that point I'm enforcing policy P5. I might then go back, change my policy, and I might do analysis on the changed policy as distinct from the currently enforced policy, as almost like a staging step for then subsequently enforcing that staged policy.
Oh, I see. So if I make changes to the policies in the workspace, it won't actually update the rules until I click enforce again.
That's right. You've got ways to do further refinements and adjustments and to validate those before you come back and you say, I'm ready to enforce the next version.
Okay.
And that's how we have the different versions that are in place there, and I can say now, I'm ready to enforce the latest version. Okay. So you can have this kind of cycle going on as the application evolves, as you change the policy, it can live with that.
Right. So I can continue to test, build, modify policy without fear of actually updating what's being
Exactly.
enforced.
Just changing a line in policy doesn't suddenly affect it down to the workload.
Yeah, that would be useful for when I let Remy get access to the system.
If that should ever happen, right? That's what role-based access is for.
Oh, I see. Okay. I'm glad that we have that feature.
Okay, so at any point we can come back to the switch application up in the right-hand side. It's going to bring us back to the table of all of our workspaces. where we can see, and again, I'll just resort this, based on the tree, the scope tree that we were looking at, we've been exploring the application policy for our core banking prod app.
Okay.
Now, we might also have global policies, banking group policies, which in this case allows us to define policies in different ways. Now, remember, what were the two policy types that we spoke to, Tim?
Default and absolute, if I remember correctly.
They were default and absolute, you're right, which means that we can step into, let's say, global policies and see that in this case there are 0 default policies. We're not running ADM on a global layer. We typically do that at the application layer.
I mean, that makes sense to me, right? ADM has application discovery. This is not specific application policies. This is global policy. So I wouldn't expect to be running ADM here.
No, that's right. But we do have absolute policies.
Okay.
So absolute policies allows us to write those absolute human-defined rules that in this case we want to apply across the scope tree, or the scope tree from the point, the scope that it's associated to, downwards. So global, we're doing it at the inside layer, which is basically everything like organisation-wide, everything that is in our world. We want to have this set of policies defined.
Okay, so you're saying these rules, like allow access to DNS, allow access to titration, that's going to apply not just to that core banking application, but to every application.
That's right. Yeah, and this is a common way of whether it's common services that you want to expose. It could also be just general, everything from like business policy to regulatory policy. These things must never be, these rules must never be broken. So nobody, let's just say, as we're talking about a distributed firewall function with distributed control, we don't want an application team to be able to do something that's outside of what our InfoSec team perhaps requires as part of the service consumption or delivery.
So you're laying down the rules of the land, and then that provides a sandbox to the application teams who can continue to modify their own policy, but it still controls what they are allowed to do ultimately.
That's right. And these rules here can also be a combination of the allow and the deny rules. So this is where we might want to introduce some blacklist rules or grey list effectively by combining those things that, again, ensure that the things we want to just allow get that happens, and the things that we want to always deny, that is always pushed down again, can't be overridden.
So that is interesting. You have actually allow statements here. So what you're doing is creating a policy that means that I can separate that from the individual application policies, and because we've already permitted DNS, and I didn't see DNS in the previous screen.
Yep.
So
this is a great point. That by actually defining policy at a higher layer in the scope tree, it means that we simply don't need to expose that in the application layer itself. Now, it's still going to be part of the overall policy that's actually provisioned and enforced at the workload, but it means that we're sort of reducing the noise level. Without these rules, all that certainly will be discovered and will be shown at the application level. By us drawing it up, it basically allows it to, we just sort of take that out of the view, and it gives it, again, much more relevance to the application teams who perhaps don't need to see or necessarily care about some of just the fundamental services that actually make up the application.
okay, so when they get to see that view, it's not cluttered up with all of the centralized services that IT is running, and at the same time, the centralized services team doesn't need to know everything about every application to go ahead and apply those general services.
That's right. Yep. So we bring those things together, ultimately delivering the policy to the user. And again, the same set of workspace tooling is available at each of the levels based on the policies that are provided there. In the same way, for the global policies to be enforced, we go into the enforcement tab and we enforce that. And by doing so, again, that will enforce that through all of the workloads that make up or are within the hierarchy under that point.
Okay, so I still have the policy analysis tab, I still have the enforcement tab, all the tools are there in the toolbox for me. And I also noticed this one, you have the catch-all set to allow.
Yes, so we will we'll step into that in our policy analysis section, and policy ordering and hierarchy. That's how we actually bring the policies together, and you'll see how each of the absolute policies, the default policies, as well as the catch-alls are combined to deliver the desired result.
Okay.
So I think that wraps up this session. Tim, was there any last questions you had?
I feel a lot more comfortable with walking through this user interface now and exactly what is going on with those default policies, those absolute policies, the different constructs we have available. I'm interested to learn even more about this now.
Yeah, so pretty much each one of those components that we stepped into, there'll be subsequent modules we'll go into more detail and put it all together for you.
Okay, fantastic.
All right. So that concludes this module on Policy Workspaces. For more detail, please go to cisco.com/go/tetration. Thank you.